Rebel Galaxy Outlaw is a 2019 space sim released by indie developer Double Damage Games. I feel like I should probably be more specific than that right from the jump, because RGO is a very particular kind of space sim for a very particular kind of player, that being fans of Wing Commander Privateer. If you loved Privateer and wanted more, but maybe thought Privateer 2 and Freelancer changed too much, then buddy, do I have the game for you, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The story behind Rebel Galaxy Outlaw starts with 2015's Rebel Galaxy without the Outlaw. That's just Rebel Galaxy. Double Damage's first game. I believe the name Double Damage is a coy reference to the studio's two founders, Eric Schaefer and Travis Baldry, who had previously founded Runic Games of Torchlight fame, only to strike off and do it again, but smaller this time, as they were the company in its entirety. Baldry was a huge fan of Privateer, and Schaefer was very amenable to making a space game, so they decided to make a game like that. However, they had relatively little means and faced what appeared to be stiff competition in the form of the newly released Elite Dangerous and the soon-to-release Star Citizen and Squadron 42. Any day now. So they decided to swerve a bit to differentiate themselves while reducing the game's scope in the process. Instead of directly controlling a fighter ship, Rebel Galaxy had you moving a large freighter or Corvette-sized capital ship on a 2D plane and engaging in naval-style combat reminiscent of the ship battles in Assassin's Creed to protect your cargo. This bet paid off big time, and Rebel Galaxy released to rave reviews and massive sales for an indie game. Emboldened by their success, they decided to staff up and make the game that Baldry would have made in the first place if he hadn't gotten cold feet. And so, Rebel Galaxy Outlaw puts us back in the cockpit with direct 3D control over a variety of fighter-style craft, making for a much more familiar experience for fans of Privateer. The game would be a prequel, telling the story of what happened to Juno Markev before she left an old ship and a message for the player character of Rebel Galaxy.
6 days ago, you received a cryptic message from your Aunt Juno, the family black sheep who you haven't seen or heard from in over 10 years.
Setting off the events of that game. We're introduced to Juno with this snazzy animated intro in which she enters a bar looking for someone, but is instead found by that someone, with unfortunate results. This intro does a good job of making her look tough and canny, despite the fact that she gets her ass kicked, runs away, and doesn't even do that right. What it doesn't do is establish the context for why any of this is happening. For that, we have the conversation afterwards.
Juno! I wasn't sure I'd ever hear from you again after your transition to domesticity.
Domestic life is on hold for a while. My husband Brace is dead, and I'm in the shit.
His passing wasn't accidental?
No, it wasn't. I tracked the guy who did it here to Lubbock.
Which delivers this information a little too casually and a little too late for it to be as impactful as it should be. I like Juno, even though her jacket's the wrong color, but this isn't a great introduction to the character. But whatever, we've got our motivation, but we've also got a predicament. We've lost our only ride. Not to worry though, because our friend Orzu has an old platypus in storage that we could use in exchange for a favor. The platypus, of course, being RGO's equivalent to Privateer's starter ship, the Tarsus, except they take things a bit more literally over here.
God, this thing didn't just haul trash, it is trash. Better get to it.
All we need to do for Orzu is pick up a package and deliver it to him. Sounds simple enough, but there is a catch. We're in the Texas system and he's in the Nevada system, but our space dump truck doesn't come with a jump drive, which is needed for intersystem travel. Sound familiar? Well, get used to it, because as we step out onto the concourse, we've got ship and equipment dealers, a commodities market, a mission computer, which even looks pretty much identical, and even merchant and mercenary guilds. If it was a thing in Privateer, odds are not only is it here, but it works pretty much exactly like it did there. Only tweaked to be a little better. For example, if a mission would require you to have a jump drive, but you don't, it won't allow you to accept it. Imagine that. Also, you can pull up the map while you're looking at the mission computer or market, and even plop down a waypoint to help plan your trip. It's like they read my mind. You can really tell that Travis Baldry has played a lot of Privateer, not just in the way RGO accurately replicates all of its systems, but in the way it targets all the little annoyances. Pretty much every complaint in my Privateer video has at least been addressed in some way, if not outright fixed. Launching out into space to do some missions, you'll find that the systems are laid out pretty much like they are in, well, I don't know how many more times I need to say it. I think you get it by now. It's like Privateer, only a little more refined. There are a few missteps that can mar your first impression of the game, though. The first is the in-flight UI, which can be confusing. Your screen is often overwhelmed with a million little target boxes and waypoint markers, and it can be tough to sort through them to find the one you want. The thing that really puts it over the top, though, is that it always shows the waypoints for all of your missions, not just your currently selected one. And if you look at the waypoint for one of those other missions for too long, it becomes your active mission, making it very easy to become mixed up and turned around. The intent was to allow you to seamlessly switch from mission to mission without ever having to take yourself out of the game to look at a menu screen, but in practice it just made everything unnecessarily confusing, and if anything, I ended up spending even more time in the menus than I otherwise would have, triple checking to make sure my active mission hadn't changed without my knowledge. Once you've gotten the hang of it, it's not that big a deal, but it has an outsized negative effect on your early experience with the game, which is unfortunate. Bizarrely, the UI for managing targets in combat takes the opposite approach, strongly encouraging you to make frequent use of this target scanning menu, which does a good job of sorting through the chaos of battle, but takes you out of the game to do it. Just pick a lane, you know? As for the combat itself, it's simple but fun. The audio-visual feedback for hitting an enemy ship is excellent, making the act of shooting feel satisfying in itself, and when you destroy them, you're treated to the very best explosions this side of Armored Core 6. That's an underappreciated aspect of video games right there. We should give a little recognition to those games that put a little extra pizzazz into their booms. That said, this game subscribes to the post-2000 school of space sim encounter design, which is to say it has a bad habit of mobbing you with a ton of enemy ships. With smaller, more intimate encounters, there's a lot more potential for skilled play to make a difference, positioning, dodging, and so on. Adding more ships to the equation tends to lead to a diffusion of responsibility. When you're surrounded on all sides, there's just not all that much you can realistically do to avoid taking damage beyond just getting a better ship to weather the storm. This is not to my preference, but it isn't necessarily broken game design. The whole point of this subgenre is to use your ship to make space bucks, so you can get a better ship so you can make more space bucks, and so on. Just like in Privateer, you can buy better ships and better equipment for them. However, unlike Privateer's Gemini sector, the Dodge sector gets better alongside you. Yeah, this game has level scaling. As your net worth increases, your enemies will become better equipped. Each system can only scale within a certain range, so it's not completely out of control, but it's still a problem, as it often is. The most impactful example is that at some point relatively early on, it becomes possible for enemies in the starter system of Texas to have swarm missile launchers. That is the fanciest, most expensive missile launcher you can buy, and it pretty much does what it says on the tin, send an overwhelming swarm of missiles at its target. Unlike us players, the enemy AI does not seem to have a limited number of missiles, and they use them accordingly. Getting overwhelmed by multiple successive swarm launches is one of the deadliest situations you can find yourself in, even near the end of the game, let alone when you're just getting started. There are ways of mitigating the threat, but as a new player you may or may not be able to afford them right away or even know about them. Having these things start to show up in the wild can feel oppressive enough that it could potentially scare you off the game entirely if some of the user reviews are any indication. I'm not joking when I say that if it wasn't possible for swarm launchers to appear in Texas, this game's rating on Steam would likely be at least one deviation higher than it is now. Another problem, I think the biggest one overall, has to do with how small the progression system feels, which, to be fair, is inherited directly from Privateer. I mentioned the loop of getting money and using it to upgrade your ship. Well, that moment when you finally earned enough cash and fork it over for a juicy upgrade is an important one. Ideally, a game like this will arrange things so you get to experience it a bunch of times and that it feels as impactful as possible. In Privateer, that doesn't really happen, as the best ship and the fanciest equipment are not that much more expensive than the cheapest one, so all you need is a couple good grinding sessions before you're maxed out. I've thrown a bunch of shade at Elite over the course of this channel, but I've gotta give it props here. Those games are grindy as hell, as they should be. They understand that in a game about making money and upgrading your ship, neither of those things should be trivial. RGO does try to address this by adding more ships and equipment to buy, but it's fundamentally the same as Privateer, and so unless you do no open world grinding at all, which seems like missing the point of the genre to me, you will probably find yourself similarly maxed out long before you get to the end of the story. Speaking of the story, once you've done enough missions to afford a jump drive and some confidence, you can head over to Orzu's contact Richter, who of course doesn't actually have the package on him, he just needs you to get it from someone else's ship, without their permission. Thus setting us on the path of fulfilling a long series of space combat-oriented requests of varying levels of dubiousness and legality on our quest to find the man who killed Juno's husband. Pulling on that thread does, of course, eventually lead to a greater mystery, but I won't elaborate any more on that except to warn you not to expect to have the fate of the galaxy in the palm of your hand by the end of it. It's interesting and kind of refreshing to see a story in one of these games that has more in common with Chinatown than it does with Star Wars, but I wouldn't say I was ever grabbed by my heartstrings or enamored by the mystery. Most of the entertainment to be had is in the character interactions. Juno has been around the block a few times, tried it all, fought Guiled and lost, and resents being forced back into the life, but secretly loves this shit. It's a different kind of perspective than you usually see in a game protagonist, and it's just fun to watch her bounce off a colorful cast of losers and weirdos for the next generation while she helps each of them with their own harebrained get-rich-quick scheme.
Right. It's a real mystery that you aren't a CEO, Richter. A real mystery.
That's what I've been saying.
But that's all it really amounts to, a series of amusements to tide us over in between bouts of blasting things for fun and profit. One thing I criticize Privateer for is the lack of any substantial mission content or things to find outside of its story, and RGO has you covered here. Many of the characters you meet in the story will contact you afterwards to offer a chain of unique side missions which further flesh them out and often lead to you being able to call them up to fly with you on other missions, among other rewards. Some of the various factions you come across have unique ships to sell you beyond what the standard ship dealer has to offer, like the cops selling you a decommissioned police cruiser. There's a fixer-upper space station you can buy with its own chain of missions to improve it. There are elusive pirate lord bosses who can potentially drop unique weapons. There's a surprisingly robust suite of mini-games you can play at the bar, which might sound kinda whatever, but it is pretty fun that you can occasionally find someone willing to put up a ship part as stakes for a billiards match. Some of the bars have an arcade machine with an asteroids clone on them, and if you get a high score, you might be contacted outside of the game for some Last Starfighter-esque shenanigans. It all peters out eventually, and the combat's not deep enough to come back to endlessly, but my playtime was about 30 hours, and I left feeling pretty satisfied, in contrast to Privateer leaving me wanting more. One complaint I often have about older space sims is the lack of enough unique music to cover an experience that long without getting repetitive. That certainly isn't a problem here. The game has a dynamic soundtrack similar to the one in Privateer, but most people who played the game probably don't even know that. This is because, in order to hear it, you'd have to turn off the GTA-style in-game radio, complete with in-universe commercials and a huge assortment of licensed but tonally appropriate songs, and why would anybody even think to do that? Speaking of the tone, one aspect that may appeal to you or turn you away is just the general vibe. Privateer had a pretty distinct, eerie cyberpunk atmosphere. The Gemini sector was a dark and lonely place, or at least it was for this guy. And if that's what you're looking for, you won't find it here. By contrast, the Dodge sector is a colorful and vibrant place, and Juno makes as many friends as she does enemies. It's got a sort of lived-in blue-collar Americana feel, exemplified by stuff like space truck stops and space cops, complete with working sirens, all of which I found to be fairly charming, but again, it's completely up to taste. Rebel Galaxy Outlaw released in 2019 to disappointing sales and polarized reviews. It's tempting to attribute this to Double Damage's decision to take a one-year exclusivity deal for the Epic Games Store. The store was unproven at the time, but developers who took the deal ended up proving that only a tiny fraction of the PC audience were willing to leave Steam to buy a non-free-to-play game. However, the developers of games like Hades and Outer Wilds took that same deal, but were able to transition to Steam without missing a beat and go on to great success. RGO, on the other hand, well, the first people who were waiting to give it a try once it launched on Steam were fans of the original game, who, by and large, did not appreciate the change in genre or the sacrifices in scope that had to be made to accommodate an additional dimension and more involved combat system. They were followed by curious onlookers, an unfortunate percentage of whom were scared off by level scaling induced difficulty spikes. All of which did critically early and irreparable damage to the game's favor in Steam's recommendation algorithm. At least that's my best guess at what happened. RGO cost significantly more to make than its predecessor, but found only a fraction of the audience, meaning it was almost certainly a financial failure. This is the likely reason why Double Damage effectively disbanded soon afterwards, with the co-founders going their separate ways. Overall, I like Rebel Galaxy Outlaw a lot. Of course, I was always primed to, as someone who liked Privateer but had lots of minor issues with it and felt like it didn't fully live up to its potential. Of course I'm going to like a game that fixes many of those issues and delivers a bit more of that potential. But I didn't just say that in my Privateer video. I called Privateer the demo for the greatest space sim of all time, which almost feels like I was setting up a game like this to claim that title. So, does it? Well, no. Making the greatest space sim of all time would require more ambition than this. A game that hewed too closely to Privateer's structure and its limitations was never going to reach the genre's full potential. Then again, it was never really reasonable to expect that out of an indie developer, even one punching above its weight. There are people who have tried to make the greatest space sim of all time, but that path has only led to madness and broken dreams so far. I think we could all benefit from learning to settle for the next best thing. And that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, a big thank you to my wonderful patrons who make these videos possible, especially those of major rank, such as Jomenthan, Justin Talbot, Julius BMT Cotere, Jan Vollmer, Red One, Erica Simmons, A Hanging Chad, Alarmed Response, Regular Casanova, and Puke Skywalker, formerly 410,757,864,530 gay cops. I'll see you space cowboys later.